A couple of days ago, I put this poll up on YouTube asking, how ready is society to address men's outcomes? And after 132 votes currently, we have 70% of respondents saying that society is not ready and that there is no awareness to address men's issues. 30% said that there is awareness, but there's nothing being done about it. And then 1% said that society is taking real action and making implementation and offering support to men to address their issues. Here's some background about that poll and our topic for today. When I was in grad school, one of my favorite concepts to learn was community readiness. It's a research framework that's used to determine whether a community is ready to act and correct an issue, or if it's still stuck in denial that the issue actually exists. I've never formally applied the model in my professional work, but it stayed with me over the years. And lately it's been coming back to me as I think about how change models, used in both clinical and research settings, apply to men's experiences and society's response to them. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to answer two questions. How ready are women to understand and address men's experiences? And how ready is society at large ready to do the same? And we'll do that by walking through two well-established models of change. Because I want to give some perspective using trusted and validated research models on what's being done to help guys with anything. So this will be another somewhat lecture-style discussion, and I think the payoff will really be worth it. As I continue, I want you to ask yourself throughout, at what stage of change are women and society regarding the models that we'll look at? So I'll start with the stages of change model, which is used to assess individual people's readiness to make changes in their lives. And then we'll look at the broader community readiness model, which assesses a community's readiness to make changes within that community. Now, I am taking a little bit of liberty here because I'll be using the first to assess women collectively rather than an individual person, and the latter to assess society as a whole rather than a confined community. But I think you'll get the point once we have a look at them. So settle in with your coffee, your tea, or your margarita, because this has been one of my favorite breakdowns to do in a while, and I hope I do it justice. It's time to all choose your timeline on the roller coaster of life. Let's start with the stages of change, which was first published by Prochaska and DiClemente in 1983. Still widely used in therapy after more than 40 years, this identifies 5 core stages of individuals' readiness to modify behaviors. And those could be anything from breaking addictions to even forming better lifestyle habits. It's a fluid but non-linear process that may involve relapse, where individuals move from having no intention to change to sustaining new behaviors over time. So here are the 5 core stages of change. First, we have pre-contemplation. So here there will be no intention to take action and often a lack of awareness at all. And then we have contemplation, in which someone might recognize that there is a problem and start evaluating pros and cons to making change, but they may feel ambivalent or stuck. And then we have preparation, and this is where people would start to take action or small steps. Maybe they've already started to do a little bit of that. And then we have action, in which individuals would make modifications in their lifestyles that could last up to 6 months. And then at step number 5 is maintenance, where individuals have sustained change and they are continuing to work to prevent relapse. In fact, some models expand this to relapse. Readiness within this model is typically measured by this readiness to change ruler as shown here. Now, I don't want to make this video any longer than it has to be by going through examples of each stage and where women collectively appear to be when it comes to men's experiences. But take a moment to look at these stages here and ask yourself, based on what we hear from women collectively, at what stage are women regarding understanding and addressing men's experiences such as health, education, parenting, fatherhood, career opportunities, relationships, or any other issue? I'll pause here for just a few seconds so you can have a look. Now let's move from that more micro level stages of change to the larger social model of community readiness. I'm going to spend a couple of extra minutes on this one here because I want to give the full context. So I appreciate you bearing with me, but feel free to jump ahead to another chapter if you're not interested in how this model works. I'll be putting up supporting images as we go, and similar to the stages of changes a moment ago, we'll have a closer look at each of these levels of community readiness right after some of the background on this model. So the community readiness model was developed by the Tri-Ethnic Center for Prevention Research in the early 1990s, and it was provided for public use in 2006 after high demand. It's a framework that's used to assess how prepared a community is to address community issues. After more than 30 years, it's still widely and actively used by communities such as the Vermont Department of Health, Native American Services in Oklahoma, and even international grassroots efforts in dozens of countries. This change model includes a measurable instrument with a 70-page manual that's used to tailor interventions to a community's current readiness to address a social issue. And that could range from anything from having no awareness at all of an issue to community ownership of an issue. By the way, as always, I'll leave links for this PDF and everything else in this video for you to download or review online. As we can see, this is the original 2006 guide that was offered publicly and that researchers, policymakers, and organizational leaders actually use. It includes step-by-step instructions and interview protocols, along with intervention strategies, structured interview questions, and a formal scoring system across 6 dimensions. I'll mention those here in just a moment. As I mentioned, it's still widely used across areas of social interest, everything from drunk driving to domestic violence and proper self-care. So it's not an issue-specific instrument. It's a general purpose framework for several different social readiness assessments. And over the decades, there have been many academic papers validating this model. There have been training materials and workshops offered. It's been adapted and has expanded versions. So it's a pretty big deal to be sure. Now let's have a look at the 9 stages of the community readiness model. And as I briefly review them, I want you to ask yourself, where is society at large regarding readiness to address and improve men's outcomes? At this first stage, we have no awareness, right? So there would be no recognition that there is an issue. And then we have denial. There might be some acknowledgement, but it's not a problem. Then we move on to vague awareness. So a problem exists, but there's no motivation to address it. Then we have the pre-planning, recognizing a problem and the need to do something about it. And then there's preparation, where we might see an active planning and information gathering stages. Then we have initiation, and that is the early implementation of interventions. And then we move on to institutionalization or stabilization. So here programs are running, supported, and accepted. Stage number 8 is the confirmation or expansion, and this is where programs are evaluated and expanded. Maybe they're refined. Then we have 9, professionalization. This is a high level of community ownership of the issue. And here we would see detailed knowledge of the issue along with effective and sustainable programs. To determine what level of readiness a community is at, the model formally measures 6 things. One of them is community efforts, and this is existing programs or policies that address the issue. They also measure effort awareness, such as how aware are people of those efforts. They measure leadership, that would be support from investments from local leaders. Also measured is community climate, like the community's attitude toward the issue. They also measure knowledge about the issue, for example, how well the issue is understood by the community in general, and then resources, such as people, time, and money that's available to put into it. So after measuring these 6 things, the community is placed along the continuum of the stages, which can increase or decrease as circumstances change, right? They can go back and forth throughout these stages. Now, with that understanding, let's dive into several of men's current experiences, and I want you to keep thinking about those stages and where society is regarding men's outcomes. Let's start with research as a whole, just in general. Most research is still one-directional and female-focused. That is, across institutional and academic work, gender inclusion is overwhelmingly defined as improving outcomes for women, not men. In my own published dissertation research, I showed that between the years 1900 and 2010, there were only, I believe, 10 research articles that were published in which the outcome focus was divorced fathers' well-being. 10 articles in 110 years. Research consistently frames gender inequality as women's underrepresentation, not men's outcomes, which shapes how problems are even recognized. In one of my own recent videos, I showed that dating app research excludes men's experiences, and when men are discussed, it's about women's safety and men's violence. This means that the baseline assumption in research is very often that men are already included despite evidence otherwise, and that more gender parity is essential. Essentially, major data sets, even those like Pew Research Center, tend to track things like pay gaps, representation gaps, leadership disparities, and they almost never discuss or report on male experiences regarding family, employment, health, or any other aspects, including education and therapy. Moving on to the next area, the only consistent male-focused efforts are getting men to support women. When we do see that men are mentioned in social science research, it's often not about helping men. Instead, what we overwhelmingly find is determining how to get men involved in efforts of gender equality. Here are some examples, again with images on the screen. From this 2022 article, Male Allies at Work. Male allies reduce women's isolation and increase perceived support and respect. And this Australian doctoral student's dissertation from 2016, and here, as we can see, the author writes that identifying barriers to women engaging in collective action, and they give examples of this to include facilitating men's participation in feminist collective action. And in 2014, these authors' article includes a focus on men confronting sexism and supporting women. I intentionally showed a couple of papers from 10 or more years ago to show that this is not a new phenomenon. The key takeaway, at least for me, is that men are only used as props to improve women's outcomes, not as a group to include in research to improve their lives. Let's talk a little bit about men being excluded and their experience, and that experience is in fact valid. Some research has acknowledged this friction. For example, this from Johns Hopkins. Men are underrepresented in cancer research, but corrective policies aren't helpful because of restrictions and expense. So they're acknowledging that it's an issue, but we can't do anything about it. And here from the American Institute for Boys and Men, the increasingly lopsided gender representation is not being directly addressed by policymakers or professional organizations. So this is being addressed. Let's talk a little bit about programs, social programs, and men. Now, to be clear, there are social programs that purport to include men, but look how many of them are framed. Toolkits like this one from UN Women, this was from just a year and a half ago, how women and boys can push for gender equality. And I'm sure that most of you have heard of the He for She Alliance. Now, this is their male allyship toolkit, a resource for building inclusive workplaces. What they actually do is train men to admit bias, to mentor women, and to advocate for gender parity. What they do not do is increase male outcomes or promote men or their outcomes at all, not one bit. Even where men are recognized in social programs, they are in terms of helping women. So here's a quick recap before we move into just a few of men's real experiences. Across all credible sources, what exists in research, we have helping women's advancement and lack of men's inclusion. We have why men need to be allies. There's also men experiencing negative outcomes with little acknowledgement. But still, men need to help women. There is very little research published to help men or to even understand their experiences. Now let's move on from how society is portraying men's experiences to how men have responded to cultural shifts in the past few decades. Let's talk a little bit about men's general disengagement. Now, I'm not going to cite all of these here, and I'll go through them pretty quick because this information is easily enough to find and to confirm, but I'll put up more screenshots as evidence as I go. Let's talk about education disengagement. About 1 million fewer young men in college compared to 2011. Men are now 44% of college students, down from 47%. Only 39% of male high school grads enroll in college. That's down from 47%. Women decline slightly, but still remain much higher. People aged 25 to 34, 47% of women have a bachelor's degree compared to 37% of men. And even among teens, more girls than boys plan to attend college. Let's move from education to workforce. Women now make up over 50% of the college-educated workforce. Men and women without degrees cluster into completely different segregated jobs by gender. A little bit more about education here. 34% of men say that they opted out of getting a degree because they didn't see the value in it. So men are more likely to say that they didn't need college or that it wasn't necessary for whatever path they have for themselves. Let's talk a little bit now about relationships and social disengagement. Public perception of men's trajectory shows that 39% of men said that they are doing worse in getting well-paying jobs compared to far less than that, 21% of women. In dating and relationships, 44% of Americans say men are doing worse at finding a partner. Now, even in my own content, I've reported that there are no hospitals dedicated to men. School administrators are often 20% men. Men receive less Social Security retirement than they pay in. And also, men experience worse therapy outcomes when the therapist is a woman. And yet, surveys like this one from Pew show that men are perceived as doing far better in each of these life categories compared to 20 years ago. And women's increases are even higher than men's. As you can imagine, I could go on for hours and days talking about this. I will never run out of content talking about those issues. With all of that context, let me offer some commentary. What frustrates me is the entire fallout and the subsequent public response to men's outcomes. Despite so many clear indicators of male disengagement across education, work, healthcare, relationships, fatherhood, the dominant cultural response has not been to ask what's driving any of it or how to fix it. Instead, women, politicians, businesses, educational institutions, all of them choosing to blame and to shame men. It's tasing and curb stomping men when they don't even want to participate and they just want to be left alone. When men navigate toward spaces like the red pill or figures like Andrew Tate, Fresh and Fit, Jordan Peterson, Kevin Samuels, Myron Gaines, all of those, when guys go there, people's reactions are to ridicule and to offer moral condemnation of men. The fact that women and society can't understand this is extremely telling when we put in perspective the models that we've looked at. Women as a group are not even at stage 1 in the change model, and society is in denial at stage 2 of the readiness, the community model. The headline is that something is wrong with men themselves rather than asking what unmet needs or unanswered questions are driving men's outcomes in the first place. Hell, we don't even have to ask what men's needs are. We already know. It's in the news and in the headlines every day. All of this tells us a lot about where we are in the stages of change model that I spoke about at the individual level. If women as individuals are still in pre-contemplation, and I wouldn't even say that they're at that stage, then they don't even recognize that there are men's issues or that they have legitimate difficulties. So men are described as flaws. And that's when shaming and dismissing become default reactions, because the underlying issue hasn't even been acknowledged or stated that it's worthy of any attention. And from that stage, the idea that men might be needing support or guidance doesn't even register as a possibility. To women collectively, it's just bad choices made by stupid boys. Zooming out to the community readiness model is where we really see the pattern at scale. If our society were even at the pre-planning or preparation stage, I would expect to see things like programs, policies, institutional efforts, and much more that are designed to engage men constructively and to get them back into careers, into education, and to stop checking out. But instead, what we have is denial and resistance at stage 2. While there may be recognition that things are off, there is no response and no recognition for concern. It's just people continuing to say that boys and men are falling behind, and that's all we ever hear. No one's fixing it. That's it. That's as far as it goes. And at the same time, our cultural climate still has a tone of dismissal and skepticism toward men's experiences, which is exactly what we would expect at stage 2 of community readiness. So the rhetorical question becomes unavoidable. If men are pulling back from education, if they're opting out of certain career paths, if they're struggling more in their relationships and in their health outcomes, and if there is no recognition, no acknowledgement, no planning, then what exactly are men supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? When the only public response is either silence or criticism, is it really surprising that so many men turn to whatever spaces are available? Like seriously, either help men or shut the fuck up. In many cases, the red pill, manosphere, or whatever you want to call it, those are the only places offering any kind of direction. And this is where both models of change converge. At the individual level, women in general have not moved far enough along to even engage with the issue seriously. They are below stage 1. And at the macro societal level, the willingness to respond does not exist. As a result, men are checking out more and more every year. And it's got to be obvious to everybody at this point. As a final thought for those of you who stuck around to the end, let me ask you this. What's worse? Not knowing that there is a problem, or knowing that there is a problem, but not caring enough to do anything about it? So let me know what you think. As I mentioned, this has always been a huge interest of mine, this community readiness model. I'm curious. I really want to hear what everybody thinks about my approach in explaining it in this matter. Thanks for being here. This one took a bit of work. I'll see you soon.